All right. Hey, good afternoon, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. This is your afternoon tropical update. Today, we are tracking Tropical Storm Rafael in the Western Caribbean, moving over the Cayman Islands here at this hour and moving towards the western part of Cuba. Eventually going to work into the Gulf of Mexico, where some impacts are possible for the Gulf Coast later this weekend, but how much remains to be seen. We also are watching two other areas of interest in the Atlantic Basin. We'll cover them towards the end of the video. One will be north of the Antilles, moving slowly westward. And then we're also watching this disturbance right here. If you hear any background noise, we have guys doing the grass out here in the yard, so you might hear a little bit of background noise, but it shouldn't be too bad. So Tropical Storm Rafael, 4 p.m. from the National Hurricane Center. Maximum sustained wind, 70 miles per hour, and that movement to the northwest at 15 miles per hour. Pretty good pace right now. Storm has intensified a good bit here today. The central pressure about sub 990 now, so we're on our way towards hurricane territory. Hurricane hunters have been finding evidence that it's pretty close at this hour, and hurricane warnings may in effect for the Cayman Islands and western Cuba right now. We also have tropical storm warnings up for central Cuba and the Florida Keys from about the Channel 5 bridge southward and the dry Tortugas, where some kind of secondary effects are possible as Rafael moves by on Thursday. Overall, the forecast theory has not dramatically changed. We expect that general northwest motion to continue through the next day or so. And then we expect a more turn to kind of the west-northwest as we go into Thursday and Friday with a gradual slowdown. And this is kind of where we have our fork in the road we've talked about, where some models take Rafael more to the west, kind of over north of the Yucatan and more towards like Louisiana and Texas. Other models kind of keep that more northward motion and bring it up towards the Mississippi Delta region, Mississippi, Louisiana, maybe eastern Louisiana going into the weekend. But the uniform thought is that Rafael is going to peak in intensity before landfall in Cuba, pass by Cuba pretty quick. This isn't going to weaken the storm much, remain a hurricane into the Gulf of Mexico, but as it works through the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, begin to weaken. Confidence is high that it is going to miss Florida. Again, some impacts to the Florida Keys are possible, but we're not anticipating anything serious there, just kind of a tropical storm kind of passing to your west. And then a few bands may hit some of South Florida. You might see a few outer bands, some heavy downpours, some gusty winds. But at this hour, I don't anticipate these tropical storm warnings getting any further north. And I think the impacts overall to Florida will be very limited. It will increase onshore winds across the east coast of Florida, and tropical moisture will surge up into the state, so you will see a pickup of rainfall through the week, but any kind of serious impact, especially up in like Jacksonville or something, are not going to happen. Rafael is going to move away from you guys, and I know you're a weary, battered state this year. You're not going to get this one. It's going to pass by to your west. So for the rest of the Gulf Coast, what does this look like? Well, we'll take a look at that in a minute. Satellite presentation of Rafael looking really good today. It had some dry air entrainment earlier, but the last few hours, the satellite presentation has improved quite a bit, and that core of stronger storms and colder cloud tops are starting to burst around that center, and we think that's where that eye wall is forming, and it's very close to hurricane status right now, so it'll probably be a hurricane tonight. It'll be like the 10th or 11th hurricane of the year or something, but overall, it's got that look to it. Great outflow channel off to the east, and that tighter core wrapping around the stronger winds, that central dense overcast, the canopy of cold cloud tops extending, and it looks like it's mixing out. The outflow is improving. You can see the outflow also improving to the north. Those high clouds are moving north. It's getting itself together, and this will be a hurricane and potentially has a window to rapidly intensify before it makes landfall in western Cuba, where I would at least be expecting a Category 2 strike in that region as it goes through the next day or so. From there, again, this is where the models begin to diverge a little bit. One of the reasons is this high pressure ridge guiding the storm off to the west right now, off the coast of the Carolinas and Florida. On the GFS is kind of showing the ridge kind of set up like this. So it kind of leaves this window where Rafael can just follow it along slowly and slowly move towards the Gulf Coast. European model at the same time shows the ridge much more prominent, and although this won't completely block it, the ridge is much stronger on the Euro, and this forces the storm to turn west much earlier and more into the central Gulf and not really come anywhere near the Gulf Coast states at first. So this is kind of a common bias of the Euro to be a little bit stronger with highs than the GFS. We're running some more upper air emissions, and I'm sure we're gonna get some more data in these models to see which one's really right. But if you kind of correct for the biases, you kind of get what the Hurricane Center has, which is that more like that kind of bend back to the west going into Thursday, Friday, but then eventually kind of some kind of curve northward where it still moves north, just maybe not as cleanly north as the GFS, but not as like hard hooking as the Euro. They're kind of lying in the middle, which is a common forecast tactic tactic they use, and they're usually pretty close to accurate with that one. So that's kind of the difference in the split right now, is basically just how strong this high is guiding it. But this is what's going to push it away from Florida and push it into the Gulf of Mexico. The good news is with Rafael is that everything points to this thing dramatically weakening once it gets into the Gulf. This is the GFS 200 to 850 millibar wind shear map. This shows upper level winds that could be hostile to the storm and maintaining its structure and intensity. And when you see yellows and reds, you see winds moving out of the southwest to the northeast, and that is very detrimental wind shear. Being this time of year, it's a wintertime weather pattern in the Central Plains and all that, and this is a very strong wintertime trough, which is going to be much more destructive to a hurricane than it would be like in August or September. It's got a lot more teeth behind it because of the pattern change. With that in mind, you see the storm having a lot harder time around the Gulf of Mexico trying to get itself together. And you see the wind shear much greater as it moves northward. Same thing with the relative humidity. You can see tropical moisture even on early as Thursday morning streaming up into Florida and the Carolinas, where a couple inches of rain are forecast through the weekend. But as it goes into Friday and Saturday, man, it starts getting hit fast. Like the shear just rips the storm to pieces. And even the hurricane models, the HWRF model, if I back this up here, you see it hit Cuba, 978, really well organized storm. And then it just kind of, as it goes into the Gulf of Mexico, man, it just starts getting pulled apart and dissipates it almost completely. I mean, the Hurricane Center even outright says in their discussion that it may fully dissipate before, where does it actually say that? Currently, well, it says it somewhere. I know it. I just read it the other day. But very possible this doesn't even actually make it all the way to land. It instead just dissipates over the Gulf of Mexico. Very possible. Miami oceanic heat content, same thing. Very strong warm water over the Caribbean. You get into the Gulf, not so much the case. So that's kind of what we're looking at over here on Tomerberg's website, showing the same thing. Wind shear increasing, sea surface temperatures going down, humidity going down, oceanic heat content going down. These three things down, wind shear up. That's not a recipe for success for a tropical system. So the gist here is, if this were to come up to the northern Gulf Coast, anywhere from the western Panhandle of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, or even eastern Louisiana, it would be a far weaker storm than it's going to be when it hits Cuba, and it may not even be a storm at all. It may be kind of an unrecognizable, sheared out, dried out low pressure that is just some wind as it passes by. So definitely not so worried about it yet. Most of the rainfall looks like it'll be up in the Carolinas from this, as the tropical moisture streams over Florida and up into there, where an upper weather system might give this a little more of a kick. But generally beneficial rain. Pretty much anywhere you're looking on this map right now probably needs the rain. So a bit of a good news for there. So that's what I got for Rafael. Real quick hits on the rest of the Atlantic Basin. This is another area we're going to be watching from the National Hurricane Center, up to 30% in the next 7 days. A low pressure area is forecast to develop north of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola. We can see this on the broad satellite presentation. Big cold front extending across the Atlantic, and the low pressure expected to form on the tail end of that and move slowly back to the west. Right now, it looks like drier air and shear will probably keep this in check as well. But we could have some kind of sneaky low moving into the Bahamas. And if I was in the Florida Keys and South Florida, maybe South Lake Okeechobee, I would be keeping an eye on it as well. But any development is going to be slow. Hurricane hunters may go out there late this week to take a look at it, but right now, no reason to think that this is any significant threat, just something we're tracking as we move along. Remember, as we talked about with the pattern change, the MJO influence, all that stuff, it's very favorable in the tropics right now. Even though it's this late in the season, we are in a overall favorable kind of window right now. And we talked about this back in October being the case. So not only are we going to have Rafael, we may have one or even two more named storms, because besides what the Hurricane Center is tracking, I'm curious about this system down here in the Central Atlantic, and this moves along, and next week the GFS develops another hurricane in the Caribbean. That one looks like it's probably going to stay down in the Caribbean, but it does develop another storm, so we may have one or two more named storms at least going into the rest of November. So can't let our guard down yet, but right now Rafael looks like the only threat, but he does not look like a serious threat to the Gulf Coast. But we are going to keep an eye on it in case things change. We will have more information as it comes in, but that's what we got for you today. So that's what I got for your tropical update. As always, thanks for watching, and have a good one.